Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Tabakata Om Shri Chaitanya Prachadena Tadrupasya Vinirnayam Balopi Kurute Shastram Dristva Vrajarilasinhi Om Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Om Tavakatam Ritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibiritam Kalmashapaham Shravana Mangalam Shrimadatam Bhubi Grinantiye Buddha Jana. Welcome, dear devotees. Hold on, let me just escape this view for a minute. We're getting back into our Ramakrishna Katha. We are getting back into our study of Vaishnavism and the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Last time we covered many different topics, including some of the experiences that Thakur had with members of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, the dominant Vaishnav school of his time and his place. And we're going to continue a little bit of that today, getting into some other facets of it and also observing Sri Ramakrishna's interactions with Vaishnavas in this field, in this sect, this denomination, one could call it, of varying types and viewpoints and philosophies. And one thing common, we'll see that Sri Ramakrishna has a wonderful way of taking and affirming what is good about each type of practice that we're going to discuss today, each type of approach to the Vaishnav religion that he encountered, but also explained it in, not explained it, but assimilated it into his philosophy in his own way. We will see. And so I wanted to begin by describing an incident that's recorded in the Katamrita, in the Gospel, as the Panihati festival. The Panihati festival, or the chipped rice festival, we've told its story of the origin of this festival, this Vaishnava festival, with Raghunath Das Goswami, one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, and his pastimes with Nityananda Prabhu. We did a whole class on Gaur Leela, where we discussed this scene in detail, our very first class on Gaur Leela. And we continued that, series, whatever you want to call it, this year on Nityananda Trayodasi, where we told that story in greater detail, along with many other divine pastimes of Nityananda Prabhu. And so this festival, this yearly festival, I'll start reading. We'll explain as we go through. This is from the Katamrita, Volume 4, Section 6. The date would be Monday, 18th June, 1883. In the summer, the festival's coming up. As soon as the carriage, so Sri Ramakrishna is going in a carriage to see this festival, this historical festival, says it is the festival of flattened rice of Pandit Raghava, Raghunath Das Goswami. It is celebrated every year on the 13th day of the lunar month of the bright fortnight. This festival was first celebrated by Raghunath Das Thereafter, Raghava Pandit celebrated it every year. Nityananda said to Raghunath Das, "Oh, you thief! You just come running from your home and steal the taste of divine love without any of us knowing it. I am going to punish you today. Celebrate a festival of flattened rice and serve the devotees." So, as we recall from this beautiful story where Raghunath Das is the son of billionaires who leaves everything to join the Hare Krishnas, to join Mahaprabhu's movement as he's singing and dancing around India. And Mahaprabhu tells him, "You don't need to come and follow me. Go home and operate." Prabhupada in his translation says, "Just like an ordinary pounds and shillings man. Do your family duties, and keep your mind fixed on me." And later on, long after this, Raghunath Das gets an opportunity to see Nityananda Prabhu, and he pays obeisance from a distance. And so this is why Nityananda says, "Oh, Raghunath Das is a thief. He's trying to see me, trying to get my darshan without me knowing. And also he is trying to steal the darshan of Mahaprabhu, because we are supposed, just like we go through Sri Ramakrishna to get to Mother Kali, or rather, probably, a more relevant example is we approach Holy Mother or approach Swami Vivekananda for the grace of Sri Ramakrishna. So we approach Nityananda Prabhu for the grace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so Raghunath Das had it the other way around. Raghunath Das went to Mahaprabhu first. He was blessed with that darshan. And so it is a blessing, but it was somewhat of an offense, quote unquote offense. And so accordingly, Nityananda gives a punishment, which is actually a blessing in disguise as well. He tells this son of a billionaire, "Feed all of the devotees with dishes of chipped rice and yogurts, this simple poor man's food." He commands this son of a billionaire to feed everybody. Very sweet story. And so this festival is celebrated every year in the same location along the bank of the Ganga. Thakur visits almost every year. Today he came with Ram and other devotees. Ram had gone a long way from Calcutta to Dakshineshwar with M in the morning. They had met Thakur, saluted him, and then taken their prasad meal on the northern veranda. Thakur went to Panihati by the same carriage in which Ram had come to Calcutta. The carriage traveled along the Magazine Road before coming to the chunky main road, Truck Road. On their way, Thakur cuts many jokes with the young devotees. This section is called Sri Ramakrishna in Mahabhav in the Panihati festival. We've discussed this term Mahabhav before on this in these discussions of Sri Ramakrishna's Vaishnavism. It is the ecstasy felt by only the expansions of the Supreme Lord himself. Only by Shrimati Radharani, only by Sri Ramakrishna and Mahaprabhu has experienced this infinite ocean of bhav, of devotional sentiments towards Krishna. And from that Mahabhav comes all of our individual bhavs in whatever mood we approach the divine in. And so as I read this event and as we meditate on this event, on this scene of Sri Ramakrishna dancing in Kirtan at this local, hundreds of years old Vaishnava festival, there's a sense that at this point, M, the narrator, is starting to realize that Sri Ramakrishna is not an ordinary being, that he is, he has realized this before. But there's a sense, that M records that in a tangible way, everyone around is recognizing this is not an ordinary man we are speaking of here. This is not ordinary devotion. And there are several other stories to that effect that we will explore in due time. But for now, let's dial in to this scene. Sri Ramakrishna in Mahabhava at the Panihati festival. As soon as the carriage reaches the venue of the Panihati festival, Ram and the other devotees are amazed to see Thakur, who had been in such a joyous state in the carriage, suddenly get down and shoot forth like an arrow. After looking for him for a long time, they found him dancing among the kirtan group of Navadvip Goswami and going into samadhi now and then. Navadvip Goswami carefully supported him when he was in samadhi so that he would not fall down. Devotees on all sides were shouting the name of Hari and throwing flowers and sweet confections at his feet. They were pushing each other to see a view of him. Thakur dances in a semi conscious state. Returning to full consciousness, he sings, "Behold, the brothers have come. Those two who shed tears while chanting Hari's name. They who, weeping, make others weep. They who, in ecstasy dancing, make the world dance. They who, receiving the world's blows, offer Hari's love. They are Kanai and Balai, that's Krishna and Balaram of Braj, who would steal butter from the gopis' pots, who, indifferent to caste, embraced the lowest of the lowly, who themselves inebriated, inebriate others, who chant Hari's name, though they are none other than Hari himself. They who redeemed Jagai and Madhai, and distinguish not friend from foe, these two brothers, Gaur and Nitai, have come to redeem humanity. Everyone dances with Thakur, intoxicated with divine love, and feeling that Gaur and Nitai are dancing in their presence. Thakur sings again, "Behold, the whole of Nadia trembles under the waves of Gauranga's love." The wave of devotees singing the kirtan advances towards the Raghava temple. Dancing all the way and having circumambulated the temple, they bow to the images of Radha Krishna. Now a wave of people moves towards the temple of Radha Krishna, which was established by the Babus of Gangapur. Some of the singing party enter the temple of Radhakanta, but the majority are unable to enter. They push each other aside, trying to peep inside the doorway. If you go to temples in India, this is a very common phenomenon. If you see if you go to, even if not in India, if you go to a big Hindu temple, they Hindu temples in America are big, huge, because they have to accommodate many, many people at once. But in India, temples can be very small. And so people have to push and shove if you go to Radharaman temple or Banki Bihari temple. Any of these Braj temples, Navadvip temples, very, very small and there's very packed. And even if you go to one of these big, modern, beautiful American Hindu temples on Shivaratri, on Janmashtami, on one of the days of the year where everyone who doesn't go to temple goes to temple, that crowded atmosphere trying to get a look at God that comes through. It's quite an experience, and it is, you kind of have to get swept up into it. I haven't had many with that kind of atmosphere, but these kind of surging scenes of great waves of crowds singing and dancing, these are very common to the Chaitanyite literature. And so we can see that M is beginning to conceive of Sri Ramakrishna in these terms. We'll go into specifically the implications of that statement in looking at Sri Ramakrishna's life in future episodes. But this is the vision, the darshan that M has, or maybe that Thakur has given to him of this scene. Thakur dances again in the courtyard of Radha Krishna. He is fully intoxicated with the joy of the kirtan. He goes into samadhi every now and then, flowers and sweets falling at his feet from other sides. They're throwing offerings to him. Time and again, the name of Hari is raised in the courtyard. The same sound reaching the main road is echoed by 1,000 voices. Passengers on the boats sailing the Ganges listen wonderstruck to the chanting, like ocean waves of Hari's name. They themselves begin to chant, Haribol, Haribol. Thousands of men and women assembled at the festival think themselves that Sri Gauranga himself most assuredly has manifested in this great saint. One or two of them feel that he is none other than Gauranga. Several people have assembled in the small courtyard. The devotees bring Sri Ramakrishna out of the courtyard very carefully. And so I thought this was a good place to start after last class many weeks ago. We talked on this topic because it gives us an idea of the reverence that the Gaudiya Vaishnav communities had for Sri Ramakrishna when he was here. And even if they didn't accept, the Ramakrishna Mission, we claim that he is an avatar. We claim that he is a descendant of of Nitai and Gaur together, among other things. This ultimately will be one of the claims that I make in this series. This is one darshan of the incarnation of Sri Ramakrishna. And I'm not saying that these Vaishnavas at this Panihati festival necessarily had that darshan, that vision, that angle of that point of view towards Thakur. There is a different incident, which we are going to look at in a future class, where definitely they did. But for now, suffice to say, even if they do not recognize him as we do, as Mahaprabhu himself, they recognize he is a very special saint. The mercy, the power of Lord Nityananda is said to reside within the heart of the Vaishnav Guru, the Vaishnav saint. And so they immediately recognize a Mahabhagavat, a fully realized being that has entered their midst, and they wish to pay their respects to him. But as swimmingly as Sri Ramakrishna has integrated himself into the local Vaishnav communities, at least some of them, he had some issue with the way that their religion was practiced, particularly their emphasis on very restrictive moral and ethical code. I shouldn't say moral codes. Sri Ramakrishna was that's a misspeaking. Sri Ramakrishna was very, very stringent about ethical moral behavior. But shall we say the standards of Brahminical cleanliness, or what was considered dharmic behavior, that was given a moral color at the time that we don't necessarily attribute it to it today. Hopefully not, right? Hopefully we don't. And so there is emphasis very much on when we find this sort of in Vaishnava practice today, we get hung up on these things like the offenses to the holy name, for example, which we've discussed before. We get hung up on this need, we must chant purely. And so we don't chant because what's the use? I'm chanting so offensively. I'm so offensive in my practice. I have all of these desires, so my practice is invalid, and the holy name is not manifested. It's true, we pray for the holy name to manifest on our tongues fully. But even the shadow of that, the scriptures say, even when chanted mockingly, we are chanting the holy name. There is a verse in the Vaishnava scriptures, I forget where, but it's in there. I trust me that it's in there, that anyone who utters the holy name even once is worthy of our obeisances. And there's traditionally an emphasis in these Vaishnav texts and traditions on seeing one's own fallen condition. I am but a worm in stool, says Krishnadas Kaviraj, the author of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And this ultimately, in its highest manifestation, is not a self-deprecating thing. It's not a self-deprecating stance to take, to refer to oneself as the most fallen. At the highest level, it is a practical working out of Holy Mother's injunction, her final injunction, that if we want peace in the world, if we want peace in our lives, we should Do two things. Do not see the faults in others and learn to see our own faults. It's a very hard instruction. Trinadapi Sunichina says the Shikshastakam, which we've discussed. We must be humbler like the blade of grass and tolerant like a tree. We must be willing to give all respect to others and expect no special honor for ourselves. But that doesn't mean we're worthless, and that doesn't mean we are condemned. When Srila Kaviraj Goswami and Srila Narottam Das Thakur, when they make these statements, on one level, this extreme humility is meant to demonstrate and delineate the natural position of the soul before God. We are not better than anybody. We are not more or less sinful than somebody because we are a quote unquote devotee and we bathe 3 times a day and we chant 16 rounds a day or whatever we do. Those things are meant to facilitate love that is awakened spontaneously. Sadhana is meant to facilitate this love. We're not supposed to be, we're not supposed to make a religion out of doing the right thing and not doing the wrong thing. That's karma kanda. That's not what we're after. The Bhagavatam rejects karma kanda out of hand. But we can turn our spiritual practice into karma kanda. God accepts me because I do the right things, not like those people who do the wrong things, not like those Christians over there who are eating beef, right? We become so judgmental. Also, there's a when one does not recognize, when one, is when one does not recognize grace, when one is entrenched in relying on checking the boxes of what you should or shouldn't do, or ways that you should or shouldn't be. Certainly, there are good qualities we want to develop and bad qualities that we want to shed. But this can get in the way of, as they say in the 12-step world, keeping the main thing the main thing. And one of the things it leads to finish up the thought, sort of, is a heavy criticism towards others. If we are heavily critical towards ourselves, we will naturally be critical towards others. Because we have such impossible standards for ourselves that often are just too high that we could ever do, that we end up beating up on ourselves. I'm preaching to myself right now. That we look at others and we expect the same of them. And this is toxic to bhakti. These are two sides of the same coin that kill our devotion. And so Thakur in the Katamrita, it is recorded that a Goswami was perhaps had this kind of consciousness. He was being very humble, kind of artificially humble. So Sri Ramakrishna is praising him. He says, "You are good people. You do so much japa and chant the name of the Lord so much." The Goswami says, "We do nothing great. I am worthless." Sri Ramakrishna laughs and he says, "Humility is good, but there is another attitude. I repeat the name of the Lord Hari. How can sin touch me? People who say every day, 'I am a sinner. Sinner I am worthless. Worthless I am,' indeed become so. What a lack of faith. A person who has chanted his name so much and yet says, 'Sin, sin.' A person who has chanted his name so much and yet says, 'Sin, sin, sin.'" Sri Ramakrishna criticized Christianity also because of this heavy-handed emphasis on sin. This is the Goswami is amazed to hear this. This stance can kind of throw to the other side any type of self-loathing we have in spiritual life. I find this tool is very, very powerful. And Sri Ramakrishna is not also saying we should renounce humility. He says we must always be humble. Holy Mother in Sri Ramakrishna's life, if they teach one thing, it is be humble. But what is true humility is knowing that the grace of God is so easily available to us. In the Oriental, or we should, so Oriental, that's not the proper word, the Byzantine church, It's in communion with the Catholic Church, but in liturgy and style is much more like an Orthodox church. My friend attends one of these churches. And in the Mass before communion, they say something to the effect of this Eucharist, this bread is given for the atonement and the, as the New Agers say, the at-one-ment, right? The cleansing of sinners, of all of the world's sinners, of which I am the first. And so this means I am first in need of grace. And recognizing how, and because that we are first in need of grace, grace is available to us. If we have a cup, if we turn it upside down, if we close ourselves off, if we fill ourselves up with all of these perceptions, everything that's going to be filled in us is going to run off. Water goes down, it doesn't go up. We have to be open and humble to receive mercy. And closing it off comes with being overly righteous as much as it does being sinful. And so this is a lesson, shall we say, that Thakur had for many of the Vaishnavas that came to see him, many of whom were struggling. You read them struggling with these kind of thoughts, these kind of, oh, I'm doubting, I have fallen down, I am worthless, I am, God doesn't love me. Ramakrishna is always answering these types of questions. And so, continuing, we get more into how Sri Ramakrishna would challenge or bring out certain aspects of people's spirituality that weren't necessarily, were out before or maybe had been suppressed for many reasons. And the chief example of this is Vijaya Krishna Goswami Maharaj. He is a very famous guru figure in the 19th century Bengali Vaishnav community, particularly these lines that come directly from figures who are disciples of Sri Chaitanya. Like we did an interview with Dauji Das, whose guru is Shripada Nitya Gopal Goswami, who comes from the line of Shriman Nityananda. There are also lines from Sri Gadadhar Pandit, and there are lines from different members of the Goswamis, from Rupa Goswami, and so on. And one of these is the Advaita Parivar, coming from Advaita Acharya, who we've discussed in our episode on Shiva, the greatest Vaishnava. He is said to be an incarnation of Lord Shiva. And the descendants of his line are keepers of certain temples and certain areas and holy places in India. And Vijaya Krishna Goswami was born into one of these families. But at the time, as we have discussed a little bit, this was the era of British imperialism. And so there were many what we call Hindu reform organizations that continued to evolve and evolve across the 19th century and into the 20th century. The Ramakrishna movement is in many ways a Hindu reform movement that seeks to bring age-old Vedic tradition and force it to, not force, we say, the traditions kind of naturally evolved, kind of sometimes more forcefully than other times, to be more stable for the modern era, whatever that means to be in the modern or postmodern era. And the leading figure especially in the early part of this movement, is named Ram Mohan Roy, who was Bengali, I believe. And he founded an organization called the Brahmo Samaj. He was a campaigner against caste, against the oppression of women, for equal opportunity, and sort of these modern liberal egalitarian values. And because of this, he rejected anything that could be seen to have been agreeing or paying deference to the Hindu establishments. He wanted to get to an essence of Hinduism beyond ritual, beyond varnashrama, caste hierarchy, beyond the cultural abuses that, have become a national embarrassment after the British imperialists had come and criticized them about it and oppressed them and taken over their country. This is why we took you over. You have these backwards beliefs, these elephant gods, this oppressive caste system, completely ignoring the fact that there was never for a second not a caste system in Britain. One of the most, I would love to compare the caste system in the West to the caste system in India. There's caste systems all over the place. The pot is calling the kettle black, as one would say. But Ram Mohan Roy founded an organization, the Brahmo Samaj, which took its teachings mainly from the Upanishads and modeled its worship after a Protestant church service. And so it was taking Hinduism, this Advaitic, non-dual, but also dual Hinduism that posits a God that's kind of like the Islamic conception of God or the Christian or Jewish conception of God, who is Saguna Nirupa or something. He's without form, but with qualities. So he's a voice, he can speak, he can communicate, he can be prayed to, and yet he is a formless being that cannot be captured in any form, any image. And Sri Ramakrishna loved the Brahmo Samaj. He would go there often. And he was ended up taking in many young members of this organization who were spiritually searching, including one member of this class of upwardly mobile, upper middle class Bhadralok Bengali male group, of whom Naren, the young Swami Vivekananda was. But people, Swami Vivekananda was involved in the Brahmo Samaj as well. But the leader of the Brahmo Samaj, a generation or two, I believe, after Ram Mohan Roy, was a man named Keshav Chandra Sen, who in many ways discovered Sri Ramakrishna. If anyone can be said to have made Sri Ramakrishna famous, it would be Keshav Chandra Sen. And so at the time, Vijaya Krishna Goswami was a member of this Brahmo Samaj. His family was in this strict conservative Gaudiya line, but he had rejected all of that in favor of this new, supposedly more modern and more contemporary and more fitting with the times type of religion. And at the time, there was a split in the organization, with Keshav going off with one faction and Vijay going off with another faction. And the reason for this was the marriage of Keshav Sen's daughter. One of the stances of the Brahmo Samaj was against child marriage, as many organizations are trying to do today in many parts of the world. They were trying a campaign to end child marriage in India. And this was the 19th century when this was going on. And this happened in many circles. It wasn't anything like it was very different than what you're probably, horrifically imagining. It is, you more like a betrothal. A man, usually kind of teens or late teens, would be betrothed to a young girl like 5 or 6. And when she came of age, when she had turned 18 or 19, she would go and live with her husband. Her husband would have contact with her, but she was still considered her husband, right? This is how Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother were married. And so it was more kind of like a betrothal, but still, this was not commensurate with Victorian values. It's not commensurate with our values. But at the time, it was a very controversial topic, and Keshav Sen ended up getting his daughter married at the age of 14. And this set the organization into schism. And so and Sri Ramakrishna remained friendly between both groups. He himself was remarkably progressive in some ways, in the way that he behaved towards women and the attitude that he held women in. And so I'm sure that Thakur could see this, the need for a remedy of the injustices and abuses of this old system, but he also comes from this old system. He himself was married by this old system. And so he does not take a side. He has devotees and disciples on both sides of this debate. And to bring them together, Sri Ramakrishna arranges a steamboat trip. Keshav invites him on a steamboat trip, and Sri Ramakrishna, without telling Vijay, invites Vijay to come along. And so there's this tense scene, very famous scene of Keshav Chandra Sen and Vijaya Krishna Goswami on the steamer, where Sri Ramakrishna has a famous speech about God with form and God without form. It's interesting, Keshav Sen was very, very, incidentally, a little bit about Keshav Sen, he was very beloved of the Christians. He would rail against the practices of idolatry and the backward notion of the Hindu system, hitting a lot of the same points as the Christian missionaries would. But he also loved Kali. He loved Jesus, but Sri Ramakrishna kept his love for Mother Kali alive. And even though Keshav Sen died with Kali's name on his lips, then the Christians had memorials for him. So beloved was he to so many people. Despite this, controversial by modern standards aspect of his life, he was a great soul, and But we would not know about him if not for Sri Ramakrishna. Vijaya Krishna Goswami, he is a bit more well known especially amongst Vaishnavas in India. And so the theological conversation that Sri Ramakrishna has with both of them on the trip is about form and formless. That there is God with form and God without form. The Brahmo Samaj was getting rid of bhakti, getting rid of all of these external forms of religion in replacement of supposedly a more internal form of religion. And Vijay in other places asks Thakur about this. This is the topic of the conversation on the steamboat, but this is another example. And so Vijay says, if you can't experience samadhi and be freed from attachment to the world without getting rid of I consciousness, it seems better to follow the path of Brahmagana and attain samadhi. If I-ness persists in the path of devotion, it would seem better to take the path of knowledge. He is arguing something that would be considered blasphemous to any Orthodox Vaishnava, which is that in the stage of devotion, he's contrasting bhakti and jnana. We have these internal debates, sometimes external debates, all the time in our spiritual communities. Bhakti or jnana? What is the essence of the path? What's the real path we're following? Some of us emphasize jnana more, some of us emphasize bhakti. Different aspects. But both of us have bhakti and jnana as practices in our practice, there's a distinction between bhakti as a practice and bhakti as a prayojan. Jnanis practice bhakti, yogis practice bhakti. They all practice devotion generically. But what about devotion as a goal? Vijay is questioning whether devotion can be a goal. He's saying that if I have an I sense, that still means I can be attached to something. I can be attached to an experience, a phenomena. And that means I will get caught in that attachment. And so it's better to get rid of the I and merge completely into the everything and have no risk of that. And this is Thakur's reply. One or two can get rid of the I consciousness by experiencing samadhi, but usually I-ness does not go. We think of samadhi as dissolving of the self, right? Usually the I sense does not go. I am meditating. I am experiencing. All of this is in the designation of Shakti. All of this is in the designation, is in the domain of differentiation. We are familiar with material differentiation, but can we have transcendental differentiation? You may reason 1,000 ways, but this I-ness still finds its way back to you. Cut the Ashwata tree today, tomorrow morning you will see it sprouting again. So if I does not go, let the rascal remain as the servant. The servant I. O Lord, you are my master. I am your servant. Live with this attitude. I am the servant. I am the devotee. There is no harm in this kind of I-ness. Sweet meats cause acidity in the stomach, but sugar candy is not counted among sweetmeats. Sugar candy, the purest form of sweetness. Thakur also refers to this as the ripe I and the unripe I. So Thakur replies to Vijay, actually, devotion is the ultimate state of I-ness, the highest ontological possibility for our individual identification as Jivatman, as individual beings, as spirit souls. This is the reality that Thakur is pointing him towards, that he is lost, supposedly. During his time in the Brahmo Samaj, Vijaya Krishna Goswami struggled very much with his traditional family culture. Sri Ramakrishna would say to him, what are you doing? You have the blood of Advaita Acharya running through your veins. Normally, we don't like to think like this. There is a whole movement that we will have to talk about next time, a movement perhaps more familiar to us, of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, who are very much against this idea of hereditary Goswami lineages keeping charge of the tradition. This had become, this tradition of passing down leadership in temples, leadership in communities, in these families had resulted in some very ugly caste ideas, like, just because I'm born in this certain place means that I am fit to have X or Y office in religious office. And it's true. This is the dominant way that we think. And I'm not contesting that. I am not contesting this at all. But Sri Ramakrishna seemed to think, he was for this principle. He said that, a Brahmin without devotion is no longer a Brahmin. But he seemed to think that there was some power, some Shakti that is transmuted through this. And so he would often tell this rather aggressively to Vijay, but Vijay didn't like it. And his family kept this temple to Shyamasundar, this black and beautiful deity of Sri Krishna. And there's a story from that this I heard from Swami Ambikananda of the Kali Mandir that he tells about Vijay himself, who would get visits from this deity. This deity would come to life and go pester Vijay. Just like Sri Ramakrishna has his Ram Lala, Vijay had this Krishna deity. There's a side story about Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He once went to take his disciples to see some Babaji. I believe it's one of the Babajis in the ISKCON, Gorakishore Das Babaji, I believe, in the ISKCON Parampara. I don't know if it's him exactly. And he goes into this Babaji's hut and he comes out white-faced, this very intense guru, Bhaktisiddhanta, the lion guru, right? And he comes out and he says, we will come see Maharaj another time. Maharaj is chasing around his deities with a stick. Now, what that means, we cannot tell. And what this means, we cannot say. We don't have the experience, we don't have the vision, but somehow or other, this deity comes to Vijay off the shrine and says, Vijay, feed me. And Vijay says, I don't believe in you. God comes to you, he says, I don't believe in you. Feed me, I need a crown, said Shyamasundar. Give me a new crown. And Vijay says, I don't believe in you. I told you, I'm not feeding you. I'm not giving you sweets. Leave me alone. I'm not getting you a crown. He says, oh, but your aunt has 10 rupees tucked away in her purse. Go steal it from her. Krishna's a very naughty boy. He encourages, delinquency. And so Vijay Krishna goes to his beloved auntie, tells him, auntie had this such weird experience, this vision of Shyamasundar, and auntie is wide-faced. So she says, I had kept these 10 rupees for Shyamasundar, but I was going to spend it on a crown for him at the bazaar and I didn't, and I was keeping it for myself. He knows all, and so he must know all, and so Shyamasundar got his crown. But going back to Sri Ramakrishna's role in Vijay's life, he seemed to be the catalyst for Vijay reclaiming or rediscovering his own Vaishnavism. And instead of pursuing this path of rejecting the tradition, he became one of the great gurus of Gaudiya Vaishnavism of that era, and certainly of all time, outside of the Ramakrishna tradition itself. And so Sri Ramakrishna gave him something that he took back to help revitalize this tradition, in the same way I would argue that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had helped to revitalize the tradition, that Radharaman Charan Das Babaji, who we've discussed before, revitalized their tradition after years of its sort of descending into illegitimacy or perceived illegitimacy for reasons we will discuss another time. And we find one of these experiences from Sakhi Charan Das's blog, Living in Sri Radhakund, which talks about Thakur and Goswamiji. Sri Ramakrishna suggested that they go for a walk, he and Vijay. Goswamiji had no idea where they were going, but that was no consequence to him. He was simply enjoying his company. Ramakrishna brought him to an area not so far away known as Aridalha. It is the Sri Pat Das of Das Gadadhar, and there is a mandir there of Sri Radha Shyamasundar. When they arrived at the mandir, the doors of the deity rooms were shut and locked. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa yelled out for the pujari, but no one was responding. After some time, Ramakrishna closed his eyes and entered samadhi with his mystic siddhis. He made all the doors open up, and thus providing darshan for Goswamiji and himself. When Vijaya Krishna Goswami saw the beauty of Sri Sri Radha Shyamasundar, he became lost in rapture, and his heart became filled with divine love. The bhakti lying dormant in his heart was awakened by the mercy of Paramahamsa Ramakrishna. Soon after this event, Sri Vijaya Krishna Goswami abandoned the yoga marg and began practicing Shuddha Bhakti in Vrindavan. Jai Shri Ramakrishna. So, in some cases, Sri Ramakrishna helps the Vaishnavas he encountered get back to their roots, maybe who have strayed very far from them, including M himself. But others, who he found are very, very orthodox, already immersed in this practice, And he calls them into maybe something new, maybe something outside of their comfort zone, and to build a foundation for this new movement, not calling them away from their old Vaishnava practice. Thakur never told anybody to give up their religion. Shall the Hindu become a Christian? God forbid, says Swami Vivekananda. But I think Sri Ramakrishna is calling us both deeper into our own practices, and also gives us vision to see and appreciate beyond. And I think this is the case with Balaram Basu. Balaram was the son of a very highly orthodox Vaishnava Brahmin family who lived in Calcutta. And they were very famous every year for holding a Ratha-Yatra festival. We, again, if you want to know more about Ratha-Yatra festival, we have a long class on it, on the Leela of Lord Jagannath, which is endless. Fascinating tradition in which these three deities, the manifestations of Sri Krishna himself, his brother Sri Balaram, and their sister Sri Subhadri Devi, are brought out on giant carts or smaller carts locally. There's the big one in Puri with the huge giant carts, but local temples and local homes and local communities will put on the small Jagannath carts. Here is an example of something like what would be done at Balaram's house. This is from the Parashakti temple in Pontiac, Michigan. As you can see, a small cart that's been decorated, and Jagannath deities are looking very lovely, being pulled around. I took this photo from the festival. So this would go on every year at Balaram's house. And every year Sri Ramakrishna would come and attend. And Balaram's father was very beloved by Sri Ramakrishna. And one thing that M notes in the gospel is that Sri Ramakrishna sees something special in Balaram because his father is such a devout Vaishnava. Balaram and his father. They're such devout Vaishnavas, but they are not fanatical. They do not scoff at the worship of Shiva or the worship of Shakti. And so, like we said when we were kind of opening the class of Thakur's instructions to Vaishnavas, to kind of maybe not loosen up, but maybe lighten up. That, you are the only ones not sinning, so why do you talk of sin so much? Why do you say, oh, Krishna is so far away? Bhakti is so far away from me. Yes, the goal of bhakti may be far away from us, but that is because this is something that I neglected to mention beforehand when we were talking about the Vaishnavism's history, penchant for self-deprecation, is that the reason why we feel this way, why we get a deeper sense of our own fallenness and inadequacy the more we approach God somewhat, is that the more we approach an infinite being, the more that we realize how deeply and fully this being deserves to be loved. And we see the love that we have, and we see how am I supposed to do justice, the worthiness of love of the divine couple, of the divine mother, of Lord Jesus Christ, of Allah the merciful, the compassionate. Whatever our conception of divinity is, the more we get to know God, the more we realize is still left to be explored. And this is not, oh my gosh, I will never be worthy, I will never be, good enough for God. This is meant to draw us into the mystery. Progress is eternal, is something that our local ISKCON, temple president likes to say. Go forward, go forward, go forward is the attitude of Sri Ramakrishna's woodsman. And so Sri Ramakrishna has this aspect and this bhakti as well, this humility. But we also forget, and this is something that I've been learning a lot from the Christians in my life, the very liberal Christians. We could say theologically liberal, if not liberal in other ways necessarily, but they're very the ones that I've met in this community that I'm in, they're very much criticize this idea of creating more distance between us and God than there actually is. In reality, we are united to God at this very moment. We are sitting in God's energies right now. And yet we are saying, oh, I am so far. Oh, I cannot reach there. The reason we cannot reach there is because our mind has not been cleansed. Mana shuddhi. But how is this mind cleansed? Is by looking and seeing what is actually there. And so this is some introduction, there's some instructions that we find from Thakur to Balaram in the introduction to Swami Nikhilananda's Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, where Thakur says, God reveals himself to the devotee who thinks himself as his nearest and dearest. Because you do not draw response by praying to him once, you must not conclude that he does not exist. Pray to God, thinking of him as dearer than your very self. He is much attached to his devotees. He comes to a man even before he is sought. There is none more intimate and affectionate than God. And the text says, Balaram had never before heard God spoken of in such forceful words, such forceful words. Every one of the words seemed true to him. Under the master's influence, he outgrew the conventions of Vaishnava worship and became one of the most beloved of his disciples. It was at his home that the master slept whenever he spent a night in Calcutta. We see here Balaram Mandir, the house of Balram Basu, which has become the first temple ever of the Ramakrishna Mission. Swami Vivekananda gathered the first meeting of what would become the Ramakrishna Mission and what is called the Vedanta Society in the US, outside of India, in the world. Our whole religious movement begins at Balaram Basu's house. Balaram, who had been entrenched in the tradition to the point of maybe losing his way a little bit, Thakur sort of breaks him in, and Balaram begins to discover what true devotional service is by Mahaprabhu coming right in front of him in the form of Thakur Sri Ramakrishna and being instrumental in starting this new dispensation of Vaishnavism that begins with Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji. And so here I think we have two examples of devotees of Thakur who had very different experiences. Sri Ramakrishna told Vijaya Krishna Goswami, go to your tradition, go to where you come from, dig down deep in your soil. And he tells Balaram not the opposite, but he says, come here, let me show you what this is all really about. Let me give you an experience that maybe you haven't been getting. Balaram's father is so devoted to the Gaudiya Vaishnava practice. He is such a great soul, but Balaram, you get the sense that he was hankering for something a little more. And when Sri Ramakrishna tells him that intimacy that you see in the other devotees, that you see in members of your family, that you see in the sadhus and the yogis, that's found right here in the person and the life and the teachings of Thakur Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa. And so whether, we are both often, I think, Vijay and Balaram, with respect to these great souls. Obviously, there are very evolved beings who have been enfolded in the Leela of one of the great masters of all history, right? We must be careful when we say these things. But in our spiritual life, sometimes we are being called to step outside of our comfort zone, and sometimes we are called to go back to our roots. And so, for the many Vaishnavas and the many spiritual seekers that Sri Ramakrishna encountered, he encouraged them to do both, fully affirming their own spiritual experiences and calling them deeper into those experiences, whatever they end up being, whatever that encounter, whatever that ras, whatever that bhav, whatever that relationship is. This is Sri Ramakrishna as is this the pastor and spiritual counselor par excellence, as Nish would say. But this is only half the story as far as Thakur's encounters with local Vaishnavas, saints, and groups alike. Next time, in 2 weeks' time, we will be discussing Thakur's relationship with both heterodox Vaishnava groups who are outside the norm of practices, of practices that would be recognizable or considered proper for mainstream Vaishnavas, and also with on the other end of the spectrum, with more reformed groups of Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vaishnavism specifically. We are going to hear what Bhakti Vinod Thakur had to say on a book by one of Thakur's disciples and get some sense of how Thakur was perceived by those who maybe didn't agree with him. And it's very, very interesting. So I hope you will join me for now on Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhe Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna.